It's definitely a matter of opinion, but finding the answer to the question, who done it, is a lot easier than answering the question, why did he do it? Many speculate a number of reasons why Alex Murdaugh may have killed his wife Maggie and his son Paul. As we seek to understand the motive behind the double homicide of Maggie and Paul, we must not only consider the life of Alex Murdaugh, but also the lives of generations of Murdaughs before him. An examination of the Murdaugh family history begins to tell a story. With thoughtful analysis, it becomes clear that it is the same story that is told at the trial of Alex Murdaugh through the testimony of those who testified both for the prosecution and the defense. As we dive deep, we discover there are events in the life of Alex Murdaugh and of the Murdaugh family that have not become stories that are frequently told because they are closely guarded by the Murdaugh family and those in their inner circle. Due to the social status of Alex Murdaugh and the Murdaugh family, who are known to be pillars of the justice system in South Carolina, sometimes these stories are closely guarded by law enforcement themselves. After thoroughly researching this case, I feel confident in saying that sometimes stories are changed by law enforcement. One story that reveals, in my opinion, parts of Alex Murdaugh that he and his family do not want us to know about goes like this. This story is from an independent news source, and I also read this story in a book by Kathleen McKenna Houston. Her book, Murdaugh, she wrote, A Tale of High Crime in the Low Country, and the two stories align perfectly. I believe this story to be absolutely true. From the independent news source, this story is dated February 2nd, 2022. For generations, the Murdaugh family has been considered, and by all accounts, has considered themselves to be VIPs in the Low Country legal system. And now the Low Country refers to the area in South Carolina that the Murdaughs have resided in for many generations. This, of course, stems from the family's patriarch's long history serving as chief prosecutors over the 5 counties that make up the 14th Judicial Circuit of South Carolina. Over the course of 86 years, 3 incarnations of Randolph Murdaugh had the power to decide who would and would not be held accountable for their alleged crimes in the 14th Judicial District of South Carolina. Even after their official reign ended in 2006, this family's name has continued to hold notable sway in various law enforcement circles, particularly in Hampton County, South Carolina. Stories abound in and around Columbia, Charleston, Beaufort, and Hilton Head Island, as well as among law enforcement officers and lawyers about the scrapes that now disgraced attorney Alex Murdaugh, the son of the final Randolph Murdaugh to hold office as Solicitor General, would get into. These stories include tales of alleged bar fights, driving under the influence, asking law enforcement officers, "Bo, do you know who I am?" and being escorted home like diplomats' sons instead of getting arrested. As one might imagine, paper trails that back up these stories are practically non-existent, and sources have been generally hesitant to go on the record with their memories. Through a recent Freedom of Act request, however, this independent news source was able to unearth a nearly 30-year-old Beaufort County Sheriff's Office report containing details that, at least in part, corroborate accounts of what sources have said Alex was like in his younger years. Typically, the allegedly drunken antics during a man's 20s are no longer relevant when the man has reached his 50s. In the case of Alex Murdaugh, a longtime badge-carrying representative of the 14th Judicial Circuit Solicitor's Office and a partner at one of the state's most powerful law firms, until recently, a past marked by self-exceptionalism, apparent bullying, and a pervasive lack of consequence is prologue. Therefore, it's fair game, especially as we continue to look at the broken social and legal systems in South Carolina that permitted Alex Murdaugh's alleged behavior to exist time and again. In the early morning of February 28th in the year 1993, Alex Murdaugh, who right now is 53 years old, was accused of starting a violent brawl at a strip club on Hilton Head Island. At least 2 of the men in this fight were injured. 3 men were charged with public disorderly conduct. Alex Murdaugh was 25 at the time. He was enrolled at the University of South Carolina Law School, and he was one of those men who was charged with public disorderly conduct. 1 of 3 men was taken to jail. The other was allowed to go to the hospital where a law enforcement officer awaited his arrival. But Alex, on the other hand, he was driven home to Varnville, which was a whole hour and 20 minutes away from Hilton Head, by a deputy. So here are the details of what happened in those early morning hours. So it was around midnight. A group of Alex Murdaugh's friends went to a bar at Cadillac's Club to order some drinks, but the bartender decided it was time to cut the guys off. Quote, "They appeared to be intoxicated, so I refused to serve them," the 23-year-old bartender wrote in his statement to deputies. And these guys were somewhat belligerent. Immediately after, Alex Murdaugh decided that he, of course, needed another drink. Another quote, "Another gentleman approached the bar, a tall, heavy redhead," the bartender wrote. "He asked for another beer, and I refused him service as well because he appeared intoxicated. The redheaded gentleman became abusive, and I asked him to leave." So Alex Murdaugh allegedly wouldn't go, so the bartender called over 2 bouncers to escort his butt out of the club. The bouncers, both in their early 20s, attempted to remove Alex from the bar. Quote, "Once the gentleman reached the doors, one of them wrote about Alex. He instantly became more aggressive and was asking in certain words to fight with the bouncers. Another employee of the club noted that the bouncers tried to get, quote, "the guy with red hair outside, but he refused to go. Then he started to get all of his friends all riled up." This is when the bouncers were bum rushed by 10 to 15 of Alex Murdaugh's friends. Quote, "They began to push and shove and became extremely violent. There were 3 to 4 men pushing, shoving, and swinging at me. All of the men were highly intoxicated, and I did not know who had bottles or weapons or was going to attack me from behind." This is something that one of the bouncers wrote in his statement. This bouncer was then clocked on the back of the head by one of Alex Murdaugh's friends. He turned around and punched, quote, "the dark-haired gentleman," who was an apparent friend of Alex Murdaugh. He punched him in the face. The bartender, who would refuse to serve Alex and his friends, saw what was happening. He secured his cash box, went to help the bouncers, one of whom called 911. Another employee wrote that he heard verbal threats being made and saw one of the bouncers get thrown against the window. This employee said he grabbed the man responsible for assaulting the bouncer, and pushed him against the wall. A sergeant with the Marines stationed on Paris Island was at Cadillac's that night, and he witnessed the brawl. He wrote in his statement to the deputies that there was a, quote, "big mix-up of fighting men in the lobby of the club." The bouncer was telling the problem guys to leave, but they were rowdy and they didn't want to, so they had to force them out, and one of them hit the window and started trouble as a smaller bouncer was swung at, and the bouncer avoided the swing and retaliated with a nice punch, and the drunk guy got what he deserved. The bouncers were in the right and the customers were in the wrong in this case, and that's part of the Marine's statement. Deputies arrived shortly after being called. Emergency medical personnel were called to the scene to tend to Alex's friends, who was punched in the face by a bouncer and he was bleeding badly. That friend was 27 years old. He was from Mount Pleasant and he refused medical aid, but later he said he wanted his friends to take him to the hospital. A deputy was sent to Hilton Head Hospital to wait for the man's arrival, according to the reports, but the man never arrived. The man, who was identified as the man that assaulted the bouncer, was ticketed and charged with public disorderly conduct. Neither he or Alex were arrested. Another man, 27 years old, from Columbia, was charged with public disorderly conduct as well, but he was taken to jail. The report does not detail what this man allegedly did, nor does it note whether he was part of the Alex group. After the deputies broke up the fight and Alex was issued a ticket, a deputy, Patrolman First Class Walter Criddle, drove him home, according to the report. He noted that Murdaugh was not able to drive, and according to the report, Alex lived 67 miles away. Again, that was 1 hour and 20-minute drive from Hilton Head. No problem, man. The deputy drove him home. At the time, the sheriff of Beaufort County was a man named D.J. Lucas. Alex and the other two men charged that night were scheduled for a hearing on March 29th in the year 1993. The report does not include copies of the tickets that were issued, nor does it note the outcome of the cases. A background check done on Alex Murdaugh through Nexus noted that the charge was dismissed on March 25th, 1993. So that's 4 days before he was scheduled to appear in court. Murdaugh graduated from law school just over a year later and was admitted to the South Carolina Bar Association in November of the year 1994. Those who have followed the 2019 fatal boat crash involving Alex's 19-year-old son, Paul, might have noticed similarities between the behavior of the younger Alec Murdaugh and his son, Paul. It is important to note once again that any records of this event were difficult to find and were finally obtained through a Freedom of Information Act, and upon reading the documents, it was easily seen that those in law enforcement were very reluctant to speak out against Alec Murdaugh. This kind of behavior is a clear pattern that we can see repeating over and over again when examining the history of the life of Alec Murdaugh and the history of the Murdaugh family.